Yes, sir.
Thank you for having me.
We'll start with the dominating topic, obviously, the Ukraine. And we have this, let's say, controversial peace plan from the Trump administration, after a phone conversation with Putin, saying that Ukraine will make some concessions, and then they will start the peace negotiation. What do you make of it?
Well, first, I think it's good. Okay, many people here at the Munich Security Summit don't think that, but I do. Secondly, I think it's not surprising if you had been watching closely what President Trump said in the campaign and in his tweets and otherwise. He's outlined he said initially we're going to end the war in one day, then he said maybe in a month or two, then he said no more than 6 months. So I'm betting before the summer the war's over. He's outlined the terms that he would be good enough with, and he thinks the problem is senseless killing that's gone on to no purpose. So the Ukrainians have been courageous, fierce, resilient, but every year there's another few tens or even hundreds of thousands of people, the Ukrainians dead. Every year more of their country has been taken by Russia. Every year more of their infrastructure has been destroyed. Every year their economy is deeper in a hole. So his view, and it's also been my view now for the past 3 years, when you're in a hole over your head, stop digging. We should try to find a way to bring this to an end. And I think the interesting feature of this as I watch the signs and signals is I'm betting that President Xi will be part of this process.
Yes, we will touch upon that in the relationship between China-U.S., of course, like a proposed summit. But before that, what's your observation? You are at the conference, you meet a lot of people. Observation of the European response, for example, at least we know that they have different thinking, but different from Washington, right?
Well, I would say most of the European countries and most of the Munich Security Conference attendees support some notion that, as the Danish Prime Minister said today at the session, we should be in this to win, and until Ukraine wins, there'll be no war, and the win has got to be so decisive that Russia can never do this again. My observation about this is that these folks are delusional. They're talking fantasies. And I think that what Secretary of Defense Hexbeth tried to do at the defense meeting was, as he said, to kind of introduce a little reality to the situation. The reality in the battlefield is that every year the war goes on, Ukraine is worse off at the end of the year than it was before. I mean, just look at the facts. So in February 22, the invasion. By the fall of 22, Ukraine's advance was already stuck in a stalemate. That was the point, actually, at which Chairman of the JCS, Mark Milley, with whom I was working at the time, proposed that we should try to create a peace. There were conditions, Biden administration didn't make enough of an initiative, Zelensky was not in favor of it, Europeans were not. But in any case, the U.S. could have done, I believe then, and could have done at some other point, just to simply say, endless killing, the war can only be morally justified, as Clausewitz explained, if it's the extension to achieve some political purpose, some worthy political purpose that's achievable. Yeah. But if at the end of every year you have more of your people killed and more of your country destroyed, there's something wrong with that picture.
Mm-hmm. Well, beside the Ukraine, obviously they are not happy with concessions, loss of territory, no entry, probably no participating in NATO. Beyond that, the Europeans also, they have concerns with their long-term stability, security, let's say. Yeah. So do you think there will be a reconciliation, there will be a finally peace deal, after probably a ceasefire between the Europeans and Russia?
Well, I think again, the details of it will be developed, and a lot will depend on how the dynamics work. But I think there'll be a ceasefire fairly quickly that Zelensky will complain about, but will have no option because Trump will say to him, you're not getting any more support if you don't agree to the terms of this. And I think there'll be a European at the table, but a European voice in shaping it, I think, is not likely to be significant because the Europeans don't have the power to be a player. The reason why I think Trump is likely to, and I believe he's been actually, talking to Xi or suggesting, if I just read between the lines, that China can play a role, is that China is a big power. China is a powerful country, and China has important relations with Russia, and China has important relations with Ukraine. And the Chinese position about peace in Ukraine has been on the table already for 3 years. So why shouldn't China be part of this? And I think because China then will be able, if it were part of it, of what ultimately became some kind of a peace agreement, something like what happened with the armistice, let's say in Korea, or something like what happened at the end of World War II with the division between North and South, East and West Germany. Ukraine will not be required to give up its claim to its full territorial integrity sometime. It just can't have it now because it can succeed on the battlefield in having it. And I think if China is part of the agreement, and if China is then playing an economic role in helping the reconstruction of Ukraine, which is going to be a big undertaking, and if China is a party to the agreement, Russia respects, and Putin respects China more than any other country in the world. So I can see how those pieces fit together. Now, there's a lot of work to be done in the diplomacy, but that's the outline that I see going forward. And I think the reason why it's especially important in relations between the U.S. and China is that if that were to be done in the next several months, and if there's a summit between then the two presidents, this can set the framework for a very different relationship between the U.S. and China, a much more constructive relationship between the U.S. and China. Trump keeps saying this line, the U.S. and China working together can solve all the problems.
A bigger strategic one here, like in the Cold War times, there's a strategic triangle: China, former Soviet Union, the United States, China-U.S. got together against the former Soviet Union. Are we seeing a reverse triangle? Is Trump administration trying to woo Moscow against China?
I think that may be too simple, but I think the proposition that you do have a trilateral relationship, like you did in the Cold War, and that the interests of the parties are not identical. China's and Russia's interests diverge in many, many arenas. The U.S. and China's interests diverge in many, the U.S. and Russia. So will the diplomacy involve many cases in which the parties will be adjusting a little bit this way and adjusting a little bit that way? I think likely. And I think if and as the U.S. and China work together to bring a peace in Ukraine, Putin will stand back a second and say, excuse me, you said this was a no-limit partnership and I was your best buddy in the world. And similarly, if Trump has a meeting with Putin in which he's settling things and she's not there, he'll worry a little bit about that, which is another reason why I think he'll be there, in my view. Yeah. So, again, if you look at the history of international relations over many, many years, the idea that parties have some shared interest and some competing interests, and they have to manage that, that's called diplomacy or statecraft, and the fact that this will have two big powers, and one, Putin's only claim for fame sitting at the table is that Russia remains a nuclear superpower, but in every other arena, a middle power. But still, any country that has a superpower nuclear arsenal is a significant player, and in particular, in the case of European stability and security, Russia and its discontents are something that has to be lived with.
Well, we have, like Trump said, China-U.S., if they work together, we can solve a lot of issues. Not long ago in Davos, you predicted, like a year later, China-U.S. relationship, you're optimistic, could be more stable, better than we probably expect.
Better than expect.
Do you still hold the view?
I do. I think if you look at what President Trump said last year during the campaign, So I urge everyone to go look at it. In the campaign, we just have an experiment, so we get to see what people think. Okay, and we had 1,000 candidates running for national office, for members of the House, for the Senate, for the President. So 1,000 people. You're in a population, 80% of people have unfavorable view of China. Not a single candidate had anything positive to say about China, but one. And who is that one? Trump.
Yeah.
So you look and see what he said, what he tweeted, what he says in one of these rallies. He says, I respect China. In another rally, he says, Xi Jinping is brilliant. He says, people tell me I shouldn't say that, but I know him. He's brilliant. He says, I want China to do well. He says, I really do. Now, why would he say things like this? I mean, certainly no voter clapped for, I respect Xi Jinping. They think, what? He's a strange. So you wouldn't say those things, I think, if they didn't reflect something about what you thought. So I think he has a very different conception of how the U.S. and China might relate to each other than Biden did, and certainly very much different from the mainstream Republican or mainstream bipartisan view. So he thinks the U.S. and China, I believe, can work together like businesses work together. So they can compete in some areas and they can have disagreements and they can, but on the other hand, they can find themselves agreeing. So that's why I think this will be a struggle because that's not the view of his Secretary of State. If you just ask him before he came to work for Trump, now he's very careful to be one side. It's not the view of the Secretary of Defense before, not the view of the National Security Advisor before, not the view of the bipartisan consensus in the Congress. So he's got a lot of other obstacles, but I think the biggest factor for change and the chessboard in 2025 will be Trump himself. And I think for the places where he has settled views, where you have to watch between the lines and watch, the things that he says and read. But if you look between the views, I'm pretty sure he has a much more positive view about the possibilities for a constructive relationship, which the U.S. and China can be just like a business negotiating. And then there'll be tough negotiations, and he thinks he's the greatest negotiator in the world, so he'll get a little better deal, but it'll be good enough for both parties. So,
peaceful coexistence.
Well, I mean, President Xi said there's three things that he wanted from the U.S. He wanted mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win outcomes. I think Trump checks all three boxes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor.
Good.
Thank you for speaking to us.